Welcome to the Meaningful Signs of the Times program. The Bible speaks of the sons of Issachar, a tribe of Israel, with the commendation that they understood the signs of the times. I'm Pastor Steve from the Seventh-day Adventist Church in Guthrie Center. As our name suggests, we are very interested in the second coming or advent of Jesus. While there are many teachings on the specific signs, which can cause fear and concern, our intention is to educate people on the nature of the signs so that they can be prepared for what is happening and will happen in the world prior to the return of Christ. In other words, we want to provide useful applications that can benefit each person's life. Our program today is titled Jesus, the Suffering Servant. In each of our studies, we want to provide biblical support for all that we say. We, as a church, do not want to just offer opinions, but instead we teach what the Bible actually says. And the key for that method is to allow for the Bible to interpret itself. So, if you have any questions about what I'm teaching or would like a transcript of the message, then email me at pastorsteve@netins.net. I will repeat this address at the conclusion of the message. It should be acknowledged at this point in the programs which I have shared that you may not agree with everything that I say. And that is okay as long as you go to the Bible to see if what I'm saying is true. The good Bereans did not just accept what Paul was saying right away, but they went and searched the scriptures to verify what Paul was saying. I would hope that you would do the same. The current series that I'm continuing involves an exploration into 7 aspects of the ministry of Jesus while he was on the earth. These 7 aspects reveal the character of God that Jesus was reflecting to humanity. We are now going to explore in the final programs of this series the first and second advents of Jesus. These events are quite different in character and nature, so it is important to understand what each advent signifies so we do not become deceived regarding the signs of the times. The Jews at the time of Jesus tragically mistook the second advent event for the first advent event, and they suffered mightily for this mistake. The Jews were looking for a conquering Messiah who would rid the nation of the Roman oppressors. But this was not the type of conquering that Jesus had in mind. Jesus intended to conquer the sin problem, which is the true source for suffering in the world. It would be necessary to conquer sin so that the people would be proper citizens of the heavenly kingdom and not merely an earthly kingdom as the Jews expected. Daniel predicted that the Roman Empire would not be conquered, but would divide itself and form a religious and political union that would last to this day. It was foolish, therefore, to ignore Daniel's prophetic words in the hopes of experiencing some temporary relief from oppression. But the Zealots pressed forward with their resistance to Rome that eventually led to the destruction of Jerusalem and the temple in AD 70. Jesus foreknew of this event and warned his disciples in Matthew 24, verses 1 and 2. Then Jesus went out and departed from the temple, and his disciples came up to show him the buildings of the temple. And Jesus said to them, "Do you not see all these things? Assuredly I say to you, not one stone shall be left here upon another that shall not be thrown down." And again in Matthew 24, verses 15 and 16, "Therefore, when you see the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet, standing in the holy place, whoever reads, let him understand. Then let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains." Jesus came with a message that would have prevented such an event, and it is important that we understand the significance of the suffering servant. It is true that oppression will never end until the second advent of Christ. So we may find relief from one's oppressor, but soon another oppressor will take their place due to the sinful condition of the human heart. So, what is the solution? The solution is to change our heart so that we can deal effectively with the oppression until Jesus comes back. And we do this by learning to follow the admonition of Jesus to love our enemies. That's in Matthew chapter 5, verse 44. But I say unto you, love your enemies, bless them that curse you, do good to them that hate you, and pray for them which despitefully use you and persecute you. We will always have enemies or oppressors, so it's important that we train our hearts so that we can endure the suffering with love and grace. The Jews should have followed the advice of King Solomon when he gave this message in Proverbs chapter 25, verses 21 and 22. And I'll read from the New Living Translation. If your enemies are hungry, give them food to eat. If they are thirsty, give them water to drink. You will heap burning coals of shame on their heads, and the Lord will reward you. This was the manner of action that Jesus was promoting rather than resistance. The Jews were never going to escape oppression, so it was necessary for them to transform their hearts from hate to love, and through love they would conquer the conquerors. We also have an enemy that will not go away until Jesus comes again. So we need to learn to be suffering servants of God's grace until that time. And walking in God's grace will cause suffering in the midst of a sinful and selfish world. We will be rejected by many and persecuted by some. But if we follow the example of Jesus, the ultimate suffering servant, then we will not only endure, but we will reign with him in the kingdom to come. So let us examine the suffering of Jesus to get perspective on our suffering. We will be examining the messianic prophecy in Isaiah chapter 53, starting with verses 1 and 2. Who has believed our report, and to whom has the arm of the Lord been revealed? For he shall grow up before him as a tender plant, and as a root out of the dry ground. He has no form or comeliness, and when we see him, there is no beauty that we should desire him. Jesus came without royal trappings so that he could identify with the common people. He purposely eschewed vain attire and position so that his message would get the attention and not him. This is a model that we need to follow in spreading the gospel to our world. Let us look at verse 3. He is despised and rejected of man, a man of sorrows and acquainted with grief, and we hid, as it were, our faces from him. He was despised, and we esteemed him not. Imagine the grief that Jesus experienced when the people who created him and loved so much would reject him. And not only rejected, but literally despised him when all he wanted to do was save humanity from their sins and the judgments for those sins. It gets even worse in verse 4. Surely he has borne our griefs and carried our sorrows, yet we esteemed him stricken, smitten by God, and afflicted. Jesus took upon himself the consequences for the sins that we committed. Sin causes pain, and yet Jesus was willing to take that pain for the end result. Hebrews chapter 12, verse 2. Looking on to Jesus, the author and finisher of our faith, who for the joy that was set before him endured the cross, despising the shame, and has sat down at the right hand of the throne of God. The joy of Jesus to witness the transformation of rejecting sinners turned into adoring saints that will live with him forever. The hope of that transformation is based on verse 5. But he was wounded for our transgressions, he was bruised for our iniquity. The chastisement for our peace was upon him, and by his stripes we are healed. The amount of suffering that Jesus experienced during his trials, abuse by the soldiers, and then the crucifixion itself is beyond comprehension. We complain when we have to suffer even a little bit, but Christ suffered greatly for the sins that he did not commit, so that we would not have to experience that suffering. That is love personified. And through the immense suffering of Christ, our relationship with the Father was healed so that we might receive the benefits of being the children of God. Verse 7 speaks to the universality of sin. All we like sheep have gone astray. We have turned every one to his own way, and the Lord hath laid on him the iniquity of us all. The key word is all, and all means all, with no exceptions. Some people think that because they are basically good people that they're okay with God. But even the best sinner, by volume of sin, is still a sinner and will be subject to judgment for the sins that they did commit. We need to remember what God says about good people who don't think they are sinners in Psalm 14, verses 2 and 3. The Lord looks down from heaven upon the children of men to see if there are any who understand, who seek God. They have all turned aside. They have together become corrupt. There is none who does good, no, not one. This is the nature of the great battle that every soul faces from the enemy, Satan, who deceives people regarding their sin. Satan will lie to them that sin doesn't exist and that you are free to do whatever you want and it won't matter. Or he will tell them that they will not have to pay a penalty for their sins because he will be victorious over God and will thus free them from the penalty of their sins. Both lies are patently false and will result in the condemnation of the person who believes these lies. Jesus came to free people from these lies so that they could experience eternal life with the Father. Jesus had to come as the suffering servant so that the sins of the people could be forgiven. Had Jesus come as the conquering king, then the Jews would have experienced a temporal relief from their oppression, but would still face the eternal consequences of their sin. God in his great mercy provided the solution for sin first, and then will usher in his eternal kingdom at the second coming of Jesus to gather his saints. It is important to get the sequence of events right, for there are eternal consequences if we ignore the purpose of the first advent of Jesus. Let me pray for you. The subject of sin and the suffering of Jesus is not a pleasant subject, yet it's so important for our spiritual growth. Help us, Father, to understand the consequences for our sin, and then understand the great mercy that you bestow on us to free us from our sin. Help us to realize the great grace that you give to us to overcome our sin so that we may be loving children of our loving Father. Amen. You may find out more information about our church and our beliefs on our website, which is GuthrieCenterSDA.com, or you can contact me with your questions about the message or your faith walk. You can also reach me at PastorSteve@netins.net. That's PastorSteve@netins.net. And view our Facebook page at Guthrie Center SDA Church. We are also posting these messages on our church's YouTube page in case you missed any messages. And you can access these messages by going to our webpage, and at the bottom there is a YouTube icon that you can click on that will take you to these messages as we post them on YouTube. And we hope that you can catch all in this series of programs. Most of all, we look forward to being with you next time.